Hello everybody and welcome along to the Race Anywhere YouTube channel for what's going to be the first of 3 parts in a new mini-series looking at the force feedback settings you have available through your Simagic direct drive wheelbase. Now what I aim to achieve with this series is essentially to explain to you from a driver's perspective what changing the individual settings regarding force feedback will actually do to the feeling that you get through this wheelbase, to try and help you decide for yourself what sorts of settings are worth playing with, because a lot of people, and I would include myself in this, have often just started racing, fired up their game, and whatever the default force feedback settings are in the software, they've just gone, yeah, that'll be fine, that'll do. But there's actually a lot that you can tweak to really suit your personal preference, and you don't need to understand the mechanics behind it. I mean, I'm not an engineer at all. I don't know what's going on really behind the hood in terms of the, terminology or the actual mechanics behind it, but I do know how that feeling translates to reality, and this can make a massive difference to your sim racing experience. I'm going to split the series into 3 bite-sized chunks. This is the first part, and we're going to be covering the steer settings tab and also the presets. Now, this is within the devices page and wheelbase on the SimPro Manager software, by the way. And then in part 2, I'm going to cover basic settings and vehicle settings. And then in part 3, the final part, we're going to be looking at mechanical settings here and also some of the other effects that are available to adjust. Now, just before we jump in, a couple of bits of admin to cover. We need to talk about variables, we need to talk about caveats. Firstly, I'm going to be looking at this from a circuit racing perspective. So even though I do rallying, I sometimes try very unsuccessfully to do some drifting. The settings I'm going to be looking at are things that mainly affect the driving. If you're into drifting, this video will still be helpful because it will tell you what these settings are actually doing, but I can't tell you how they will affect the physical experience of drifting because I am not in a position to be an expert on that whatsoever. So just bear that in mind. Also, it's worth noting I'm using the Simagic Alpha base, which is the middle of the 3 direct drive offerings from Simagic. So it's 15 Newton meters of available torque. Obviously, if you go for the entry-level Mini or the top-level Ultimate, you're going to have a different level of torque to work with, and things will feel slightly different, but generally speaking, all of these settings will be the same, and the feeling that you get from adjusting them should match very closely. Right then, on with part 1, and this might seem a little bit redundant to some of you. You may know all about steer settings, what it actually means, but it's important that I do cover this because there's a little bit of confusion sometimes about steering angles versus steering ratios, what you need to adjust in your software, and what you might need to adjust in the game. So it's crucial information, and I'm going to try and go through it as clearly as possible so you can understand what's going on here. So we'll start over here on the tab on the left. First up, we have a center button, and that is simply to recenter your wheelbase. So make sure your steering wheel is facing directly forward. Once you're happy with where it is, hit that center button, and now your wheel is recentered. So if you're driving along in the sim and you're having to turn a little bit left or right to keep it straight, that's when you want to play around with that setting, but it's fairly simple. The next one down is angle, and if you hover over the little question mark, you get a little bit of a description as to what it is. You've got the same thing, by the way, for all of these other settings as well, but we're going to try and give you a bit more detail. So for angle, you can see here it sets the maximum steering rotation for your wheel. Now what that means is the full steering rotation from lock to lock, essentially from fully one way to fully the other way, not from the center. So 900 degrees in this case. From the middle means I should be able to turn 450 degrees to the left, which is 1.5 turns, and then you'll experience a bump stop, which stops you turning any further. And if I go back to the middle, I will now have 450 degrees to the right as well, and the bump stop comes in again. Now there's a couple of things we want to achieve when we are adjusting our steering angle. The first one, we basically want our steering wheel in real life that we're steering on the sim to match what the steering wheel in the game is doing. So you want a 1-to-1 ratio between the two parties. That is crucial for the car to feel natural and to feel right, and for what's happening visually to match what you're feeling. And the second thing we want to do is we want the correct steering angle for the type of car that we're driving in the sim. So if I'm driving a Formula 1 car, for example, I want the steering angle to basically stop around about there, 360 degrees, 180 either way. Whereas if I'm driving an old vintage touring car or something where you can just keep on turning, a London taxi, maybe on BeamNG or something, I want the wheel to be able to turn a lot further. So that's the 2 things that we're trying to get right when we're setting our steering angle, but it's not quite as simple as you might think. Now the thing we have to bear in mind that makes it a little bit complicated is that different games have different influences on steering angle. They have different systems in place. So some games will automatically set your steering angle to match the car you're driving. You just need to give it the possibilities to reach something as high as 900 or 1080, and then it'll do the rest of the work for you. Some games don't do that, and you need to actually come out of the game and manually set your steering angle in the software to match the car you're driving. I'm just going to quickly fire up Le Mans Ultimate to show you an example of this in motion. So I've come into the Calibrate section of the settings menu, and now bear in mind I've got the SimPro Manager software, the rotation set to 900 degrees on this wheel. Now, in the example of Le Mans Ultimate, because here my steering wheel maximum rotation also matches 900 degrees, it means that the relationship between this steering wheel and the steering wheel in the game will be 1-to-1. They should turn perfectly in sync. Now, if you were to set your wheel in your software to 450 degrees of rotation, you would need this setting to be at 450. And this will automatically do that if you calibrate your wheel from the start, but obviously if you've already calibrated it and then you change your settings, you might have to manually adjust the numbers. But basically, make this number match the number in your software. The setting above that is the important one here. It says use steering wheel range from vehicle. So what this does is the game essentially gives you the correct rotation for the car that you're driving in real life. So, for example, in this here, I'm going to be driving an LMP2 car. So by having this setting on in Le Mans Ultimate, it is going to set the steering range for me, which is not going to be 900 degrees. In an LMP2 car, you only turn around about maybe 450, 540 degrees. So theoretically, if this works, the game should do this for me, and it won't allow me to turn a full 900 degrees before I hit my bump stop. Right, we've got a view of the wheel now. So theoretically, if I turn this wheel, there you go. My bump stop is actually pretty much at 180 degrees or 360 in total. So the game has done that for me, and it's all because the game is speaking to the software. I've matched the numbers and I've told the game I want it to match whatever car I'm driving. So this is the perfect setting. This is the best way for it to be, because if I'm driving a car that requires 900 degrees of rotation, it will give me that. So the thing to take from that example is, by setting the angle in SimPro Manager, you're essentially setting the maximum amount of angle that you're giving the game to work with. So it wouldn't make a difference if I set this to 900 or 1080 or even 2000 degrees. As long as they're matching, that's not a problem. You're giving the game all of that flexibility to create its own range within that. But if I set this to 360 degrees, for example, jump back in, matched it up to 360, if the car I'm driving requires 540 degrees of rotation, the steering wheel is going to be the limiting factor at 360. It'll never go beyond that. So essentially, when the game is clever, all you want to do is set this angle high enough that you're giving it the room to work. So I would say 900, 1080, both absolutely fine on most occasions. I'm going to jump in and show you another example now using iRacing. As long as we have calibrated our steering wheel, and for me right now, that should match up to 900 degrees. Yeah, there we go, 900. Or 899. So iRacing is clever enough to know that this BMW V8 M Hybrid is not going to give you 900 degrees of rotation, so it's actually going to stop turning at that stage there, which is, I believe, 540 degrees, and it won't turn any further. Now, the difference between Le Mans Ultimate and iRacing on this occasion is that there's not a hard bump stop for me, so I can actually, in real life, keep turning my wheel further. But in the game, it's not going to actually turn the wheels anymore. There you can see. The same the other way. It stops now, but I can keep turning that extra little bit. So it's not quite as clever as Le Mans Ultimate. It doesn't add another bump stop in at the correct range, but what it does do is still give you the correct relative feeling. So when I turn this much, that car turns the same amount. Now, if you want a quick fix for this without changing your steering angle and recalibrating in game, you can simply adjust the hard lock angle setting in your SimPro Manager software to match the car you're driving. In this case, it would be 540 degrees for the BMW. I'll talk a little bit more about that setting in just a minute. Now, I know this section has felt quite long, but it is the most important part of steer settings. It's by far the longest, just because it's something that helps so much when you actually understand it. And there are other games outside of Le Mans Ultimate and iRacing that do things differently and are even more complicated. But essentially, depending on what games you play, you will find your rhythm, you'll find the right settings to have here. All I can say is, if you're new to it all, I recommend starting with this on 900 and just making sure you match things properly, because that's going to give you the best experience. Always check as well, when you first start driving a car, jump into cockpit camera and just make sure that your steering wheel matches the car in the game, because all serious simulations, they should have a 1-to-1 ratio, and that's what will feel most natural. So that's the important thing to remember. If you have any questions about it though, please do be sure to let us know in the comments below, and I'll try and make things a bit clearer. We can rattle through the rest of this fairly quickly now, because you also have an angle preset option. Now here you can see if I click 360, it just changes the angle instantly to 360. So that does what it says in the tin. You can create your own presets here, So if you drive certain cars a lot, you can create your own custom number, maybe 480 for example. You also have a hard lock angle. Essentially, you can have a different overall steering angle up here to what you can have as a hard lock angle. So the hard lock is the bump stop on the wheel. So if I set this down to 90 whilst my angle is at 1080, what it will do is essentially stop me there, which is 45 degrees, 90 degrees in total. You're not actually compressing your overall steering ability into that small amount, into that 45 degrees, but you're just going to hit the lock way earlier, so you're not going to be able to turn more than that. And then the final option down here is your limit strength. Now this is talking about the strength of the bump stop. So when you have it at 900 and you turn it 450 degrees, hit the bump stop, essentially the firmness of that hit is what the setting changes. So if I go to firm, it feels like I'm hitting a brick wall. I can't turn that wheel anymore. Whereas if I make it soft, there's a bit of springiness in it, a bit of bounciness in it. Totally down to personal preference, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I like it as soft or normal. I don't like a really, really firm bump stop, but obviously firm is realistic in a sense, because in a real car, it's a physical stop. Up to you, totally up to you, but I'd say soft or normal just because it's less harsh on everything, or it feels less harsh on everything anyway. We're going to finish up part one here by looking at presets to kind of tee us up for the next one. So the presets are what you would expect. Essentially, you can set the force feedback settings to a place where you're comfortable with it, and then you can save that as a preset. So to give you an example of this, I made a preset for Le Mans Ultimate. Now, Le Mans Ultimate and R Factor 2 utilize reverse force feedback, which is something I'll cover in the next video. But basically, this is going to be different to the settings I'm going to use on iRacing, for example. And say, okay, the Porsche GTE, I really liked my settings on, smoothness 4, wheel rotation speed 60. But say for, I don't know, the Porsche 963 that's in the background there, I wanted my smoothness on 2 and my wheel rotation speed on 50. Once I've set my custom settings, maybe I want a different steering angle as well, for example, maybe 540 degrees for whatever reason. Then I can go down and save this preset here. So if I click save, not only can I name the preset, so I would call it Porsche 963, or weird symbol, Porsche 963 on this occasion, I can also create custom tags. So essentially, I would create a new tag here. Maybe it can be Le Mans Ultimate Hypercar. Click the tick, and essentially now I can categorize my custom presets. So this is not a GTE, this is a Le Mans Ultimate, and it's a hypercar. So we're going to create a new tag category there. The game category allows you to tag it to a game, so it's Le Mans Ultimate, that's fine. And then click save, and there we have it, my new preset, Porsche 963, and you can see it there in the list. I've obviously named these all differently just when I'm playing around, but you get the idea. The filtering's really good because if you are someone who saves lots of different settings for different cars, you can easily find what you need. And the other good thing about presets is that you can, of course, share them as well, and you can download other people's and import them into your own software. So the Simagic Discord channels are well worth checking out. There's lots of people sharing lots of settings on there, and it just saves you having to do them yourself if you want, or just so you can try something a bit different, see what the pros are using. So these are all very handy, very easy to use features. It's just single files. In fact, let's see if I can do that right now. So if I click the share button, I can export as file. I can save this preset to any folder on my PC. I'll delete the invalid character, click save. Obviously then what you do with that file is up to you. You can share it with your friends. It's a really small, easy to manage file. And then if I, for example, was that friend and I downloaded my Porsche 963 file, I would click import. Then you can import from file, or you can use share codes. We're going to go import from file. Open my Porsche 963 file in there. And now you can see I have 2 of them in my local presets, because obviously I just downloaded a second one. So very, very simple to work. I really need to rename that because that little symbol is going to really annoy me. I was so focused on the custom presets, I almost completely forgot to mention that Simagic have also created their own fine-tuned presets for each individual game. So if you're looking for a good starting point, you can use Simagic's own settings. And from my experience across iRacing, LMU, and the likes of Assetto Corsa Competizione, these presets are a really, really good starting point. So that's what I would do if I'd never touched anything on this software before. But that's going to be it for part 1. Hopefully you found that somewhat useful and informative, and do make sure you check out part 2 and 3, which should be coming very soon. Part 2 is going to cover basic settings in vehicle as a reminder. Part 3 will look at mechanical and other effects. So the idea is that you can basically find this information again if you ever forget things or want to remind yourself. But yeah, that's going to be it for this first one. So thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again in part 2, and in the meantime, have a great week.